Hello, and we're back. Oops. On to part 11 of chapter 5, Shells. There are minds for which certain images retain absolute priority. Bernard Palissy was one of these, and for him, shell images were of enduring interest. If one had to designate Palissy by the dominating element of his material imagination, he would fall quite naturally into an earthly group. But since the material imagination is a matter of nuances, Palissy's imagination would have to be specified as that of an earthly being in quest of a hard earth that must be further hardened by fire, but which also has the possibility of attaining natural hardness through the action of a solidifying, self-containing salt. Shells manifest this same possibility, and in this respect the limp, sticky, slimy creatures that inhabit them play a role in their hard consistency. Indeed, the principle of solidification is so powerful, the conquest of hardness is carried so far, that the shell achieves its enamel-like beauty as though it had been helped by fire. Beauty of substance is added to beauty of geometrical form. For a potter or an enamelist, a shell must indeed be a subject for infinite meditation. But there are many animals beneath the enameled glaze of this gifted potter's plates that have made the hardest possible shells of their skins. If we relive Bernard Palissy's passion in the cosmic drama of different sorts of matter, or in the struggle between clay and fire, we can understand why the humblest snail that secreted its own shell should have provided him with food for infinite dreaming. Among all these daydreams, I shall note here only those that furnish the most curious images of the house. The following, entitled About a Fortress City, is included in Palissy's Recepte Veritable. In summarizing it, I shall try to retain the amplitude of the original. Faced with the horrible dangers of war, Bernard Palissy contemplated a design for a fortress city. He had lost all hope of finding an existing plan in the cities built today. Vitruvius himself could be of no help in the century of the cannon. So he journeyed through forests, mountains, and valleys to see if he could find some industrious animal that had built some industrious houses. After inquiring everywhere, Palissy began to muse about a young slug that was building its house and fortress with its own saliva. Indeed, he passed several months dreaming of a construction from within, and most of his leisure time was spent walking beside the sea, where he saw such a variety of houses and fortresses which certain little fishes had made from their own liquor and saliva that, from now on, I begin to think that here was something that might be applied to my own project. The battles and acts of brigandry that take place in the sea being on a larger scale than those that take place on land, God had conferred upon each one the diligence and skill needed to build a house that had been surveyed and constructed by means of such geometry and architecture that Solomon in all his wisdom could never have made anything like it. With regard to spiraled shells, he wrote that this shape was not at all for mere beauty, that there's much more to it than that. You must understand that there are several fish with such sharply pointed beaks that they would devour most of the above-mentioned fish if the latter's abodes were in a straight line. But when they are attacked by their enemies on the threshold, just as they are about to withdraw inside, they twist and turn in a spiral line, and in this way the foe can do them no harm. Meanwhile, someone brought Palissy 2 large shells from Guinea, a murex and a whelk. The murex being the weaker must be the best defended, according to Palissy's philosophy. As a matter of fact, the shell having a number of rather large points around the edges, I decided that these horns had been put there for a purpose, which was for defense of the fortress. It has seemed necessary to give all these preliminary details because they show that Palissy was looking for natural inspiration. He sought nothing better for constructing his fortress city than to take the fortress of the above-mentioned Murex as an example. With this idea in mind, he started work on his plan. In the very center of the fortress city, there was to be an open square on which the governor's house would be located. Starting from this square, a single street would run 4 times around the square. First, in 2 circuits that espoused the shape of the square. Then, in 2 octagon-shaped circuits. All doors and windows in this quadruple winding street were to give onto the inside of the fortress, so that the backs of the houses would constitute one continuous wall. That's kind of hard to imagine. The last of the house walls was to back up against the city wall, which thus would form a gigantic snail. Bernard Palissy enlarged at length on the advantages of this natural fortress. Even if part of it fell to the enemy, there would always remain a possibility of retreat. In fact, it was this spiral movement of retreat that determined the general line of the image. Nor would enemy cannon be able to follow the retreat and rake the streets of the coiled city. Enemy artillerymen would be as disappointed as the pointed beak marauders had been when they tried to attack a coiled shell. In this summary, which may seem too long to the reader, it has nevertheless been impossible to enter into the detail of mixed images and proof. A psychologist who followed Palissy's text line by line would find images used as proof, images that are witnesses of a reasoning imagination. This simple account is psychologically complex, but for us, in this century, the reasoning of such images is no longer convincing. We no longer have to believe in natural fortresses, and when military men build hedgehog defenses, they know that they are not in the domain of the image, but in that of simple metaphor. It would be a great mistake, however, if we were to confuse the genres and take Palissy's snail fortress for a simple metaphor. This is an image that has inhabited a great mind. As for myself, in a leisurely book of this kind, in which I enjoy all the images, I was obliged to linger over this monstrous snail. In order to show that, through the simple play of the imagination, any image may be increased in size, I should like to quote the following poem, in which a snail assumes the dimensions of a village. It's a giant snail, descending the mountain, with at its side the brook's white foam, very old, only one horn left, which is its short, square belfry. And the poet adds, the manner is its shell. But there are other passages in Bernard Palissy's works which accentuate this predestined image that we are obliged to recognize in his shell house experience. As it happens, this potential constructor of a shell fortress was also an architect and landscape gardener, and to complement his plans for gardens, he added plans for what he called chambers. These chambers were places of retreat that were as rough and rocky on the outside as an oyster shell. The exterior of the aforementioned chamber, wrote Palissy, would be of masonry made with large uncut stones, in order that the outside should not seem to have been man-built. Inside, on the contrary, he would like it to be as highly polished as the inside of a shell. When the masonry is finished, I want to cover it with several layers of enameling, from the top of the vaulted ceiling down to the floor. This done, I should like to build a big fire in it, until the aforesaid enameling has melted and coated the aforesaid masonry. In this way, the inside of the chamber would seem to be made of one piece, and would be so highly polished that the lizards and earthworms that come in there would see themselves as in a mirror. This indoor fire lighted for the purpose of enameling bricks is a far cry from the blaze we light in our time to dry the plaster. Here, perhaps, Palissy recaptured visions of his potter's kiln, in which the fire left brick tears on the wall. In any case, an extraordinary image demands extraordinary means. Here, a man wants to live in a shell. He wants the walls that protect him to be as smoothly polished and as firm as if his sensitive flesh had to come in direct contact with them. The shell confers a daydream of purely physical intimacy. Bernard Palissy's daydream expresses the function of inhabiting in terms of touch. Because dominant images tend to combine, his fourth chamber is a synthesis of house, shell, and cave. The inside masonry will be so skillfully executed, he wrote, that it will appear to be simply a rock that has been hollowed out in order to cut stone from the interior, and the aforesaid chamber will be twisted and humped, with several skewed humps and concavities having neither appearance nor form of either the chiseler's art or of work done by human hands. And the ceiling vaults will be so tortuous that they will look as though they are about to fall, for the reason that there will be several pendant humps. Needless to say, the inside of this spiraled house will also be covered with enamel. It will be a cave in the form of a coiled shell. Thus, by means of a great sum of human labor, this cunning architect succeeded in making a natural dwelling of it. To accentuate the natural character of the chamber, he had it covered with earth, so that, having planted several trees in the aforesaid earth, it would not seem to have been built. In other words, the real home of this man of the earth was subterranean. He wanted to live in the heart of a rock, or shall we say, in the shell of a rock. The pendant humps fill this dwelling with a nightmare dread of being crushed, while the spiral that penetrates deep into the rock gives an impression of anguished depth. But a being who desires to live underground is able to dominate commonplace fears. In his daydreams, Bernard Palissy was a hero of subterranean life. In his imagination, he derived pleasure, so he said, from the fear manifested by a dog barking at the entrance of a cave. And the same thing was true of the hesitation on the part of a visitor to enter further into the tortuous labyrinth. Here the shell cave is also a fortress city for a man alone, a man who loves complete solitude, and who knows how to defend and protect himself with simple images. There's no need of a gate, no need of an iron-trimmed door. People are afraid to come in. In any case, an important phenomenological investigation remains to be made on the subject of dark entrance halls.